reviews and previews for the championship week. Today, everything gets settled. We've been talking about who's going to make the playoffs and who was not going to make the playoffs, who deserves to be there, what conference is stronger. It doesn't matter. Everything's going to shake out in the wash today. But before I get that, let me recap last night what happened in the Jacksonville area high school teams who were vying to compete for a state championship. At four teams, Trinity Christian, as a private school power here in Florida, they won about 8 or 9 state championships, maybe more. They were in line to go back to the championship game, but they had to go down to Clearwater, and they got knocked off by Clearwater Central Catholic in a shootout. So they're gone. You have Mandarin, who won the state championship, who was only the second public school in Jacksonville to win the state championship. They went down to Coconut Creek last night and knocked off Monarch in pretty big style, something like 50-21. That was quite unexpected, but what it tells me is that Mandarin is playing stronger as the year goes on. St. Augustine, who's also considered to be the best team in the Jacksonville area, who exchanged that title with Mandarin as the season went on, they hosted Fort Myers Dunbar last night, and they knocked them off by 3 touchdowns, 35-14. So they're going to go to Tallahassee next week to take on Daytona Beach Mainland, who I believe this is their first trip to the state championship game. They've had a lot of good teams down in Mainland. They won a lot of good games, but they always could never seem to get by the powerful Miami schools, Northwestern and things like that. This year, they're going to get an opportunity to take on St. Augustine, and that's going to be a great game. You know, it's the ironic thing about these championships, you put the locations of the games where neutral field. They're going to go to Tallahassee, but the schools themselves are less than 50 miles apart. You're going to get the same thing in a lower class when you have, St. Thomas Aquinas taking on another local team, and Homestead. They could have probably just go down to Tropical Park and meet there and play for the championship, but no, both those teams got to go all the way to Tallahassee just to play against each other. That's the way it goes. Minor inconvenience, if you want to call it that. At least you're playing for a state championship no matter where it is. It can be on the moon as for a championship. Now, the other team that I want to talk about, Bowles. That's a private school who has like 11 or 12 state championships. They have 7 or 8 state runner-ups. It's just a powerhouse program, but it's also a private school who's been privately funded, and they seem to come up with athletes from all over the place, from various places, various reasons why athletes go there. I don't want to speculate how they get the players, but it's the same kind of situation that you have with a lot of these public schools now, recruiting players and getting players coming in from who knows where and driving long distances just to be a part of a winning football team. That's the way Florida allows things to happen, so you can't get mad with the public schools when the private schools have been getting away with this kind of thing for years. But the thing with Bowles, they can go deep into the playoffs every year, but they're going to come up against a team that's going to have more athletes than they have. So with the academic standards that they have and the restrictions on school size, I think they're doing that way so they can compete on lower levels and win championships. Eventually, they're going to run up against a team like last night, Miami Norland, who's going to have probably more athletes than they have, and they're going to be more well-disciplined, and they're always going to be faster than what Bowles can come up with, and it's going to present a problem to them. So as they get deep into the playoff run, this is the kind of things they're going to run into. And if the schools, if the state allows schools to mysteriously come up with players from wherever, you may never see Bowles win another state championship. There's going to have to be a major change for that to happen. But they got enough to hang their hat on, so moving on. Well, let's talk about college football today. Like I say, the playoffs are going to shake everything out today. Last night, we got our first participant into the college playoff. While it's not official, but you can expect Washington to already have their ticket punched. They knocked off Oregon last night. They jumped out to a big lead. Oregon came back and made it a game. But when Washington had to score and knock Oregon out, they did that. And that pushed them to the final conference championship as we know it right now for the Pac-12. And it's pretty much guaranteeing them a position in the playoffs. Why? Because when Florida State lost their quarterback, they leapfrogged Florida State. Florida State was ahead of them all year. All of a sudden, when they lose their quarterback, they anticipate Florida State to struggle. They played fairly well last week against Florida, but now the backup Rodemaker, he's a game time decision. They don't know if he's going to be able to play. So the committee is looking at these things. Well, can Florida State still perform on the same level as they've done all year? And if they can, then they're worthy of a playoff spot if they beat Louisville. But Louisville has done it to them before, and I'm kind of getting the feeling that Florida State might be in a little trouble today. But we'll see. But having said that, the Pac-12, I think they're going to get that in because Oregon has been dominant, Washington's been dominant, and they beat Oregon twice. So I think Washington is pretty much in. The other team that I know is in, I'll talk about them in a second, but one other note about the Pac-12. I told you a couple months ago that I thought it was a great idea if Washington State and Oregon State banded together somehow to try to preserve the Pac-12 as best they could. Everybody else abandoned them. So if they abandoned them, they abandoned everything else, as far as I'm concerned, that they probably could have had ownership to, mainly the revenue and the money that they had in the bank. Well, these two, since nobody wanted them, they decided to work together to keep the banner going. They got a 2-year window that they can do that, where they can either play a 2-game schedule or find somewhere else to go at the end of those 2 years. But I think it's a great idea to keep the Pac-12 name because with all these teams moving to these conferences, just like they picked and chose who they wanted, if these guys aren't competitive a couple years later, they may be replaced by other people that they might pick and choose over. So I think teams like California and Stanford, they may be coming back to the Pac-12 at some point. And that's why I think it's a good idea for these teams to keep the conference name going. Now, one other thing about that, they have an agreement with the Mountain West, it looks like, where the Mountain West is going to allow them to participate against their teams. The Mountain West teams, they're all going to play 7 games against in-conference teams, and then they're going to play either Washington State or Oregon State to make up the 8th game. Now, Washington State and Oregon State, they can't win the Mountain West, but they're more like affiliates of the conference. It allows them to remain alive, keep a competitive schedule, and move forward. Plus, they're going to make a whole lot of money on top of it. They don't have to split it with 12 other teams. And I think that's a pretty good, smart move on the part of those two institutions. So we'll keep an eye on that and see how that works out. But as I see things unfolding in the future, I expect more teams to start coming back to the Pac-12, and it's going to come back in some form or fashion somewhere down the road. Now, Washington won last night, won that title, and like I said, I think they're going to be in. The other team I think that is already in, regardless of what happens today, is Georgia. Georgia has won the last two championships, and they're playing championship football right now. Having said that, their thorn in the side has been Alabama. Alabama is standing right in front of them today, and Alabama has knocked them off in the conference championship game several times. So it would be another feather in the cap of the Bulldogs if they could beat Alabama. Most people want Alabama to lose because people are tired of seeing the same matchups. Well, if you're tired of seeing the same matchups, you know what the old saying goes? Beat them. Well, I think Georgia, if they beat Alabama, that puts a rest to Alabama this year and the idea that we might have 2 SEC teams in the championship playoffs. If Alabama is to win today, like I say, Georgia's already in, that's going to put Alabama in position to go to the playoffs. Now, they played a tougher schedule than Georgia, but they did lose to Texas. So people are floating around the idea that if Alabama wins and Texas, they're on their way to beating Oklahoma State. If Alabama wins that game, it's a possibility that the SEC will get left out of the playoffs. I don't think that's going to happen because, like I say, Georgia's won the last 2 championships, and as far as I'm concerned, if they get beat 75-0 today, they deserve to go to the playoffs and let somebody else beat them besides an in-conference foe like Alabama. So having said that, if Georgia wins, that eliminates Alabama and leaves the final 2 spots up, one of the spots up to between Florida State and Texas. Texas beat Alabama, so they're strong. Florida State, I think, is going to fall by the wayside at some point. either by losing to Louisville or by the perception that they can't play at a high level with a backup quarterback. So one spot is going to come down to Texas, Alabama, Florida State. Georgia, Washington already in. And the final spot is going to come down between Michigan and Ohio State. If Michigan wins, they're in. But if they lose, then people are going to start comparing them again to Ohio State. People love Ohio State regardless of how you feel about them. But the thing is, they beat Ohio State head up. But even with that, a couple years ago, Penn State beat Ohio State head up, but Ohio State got the nod to the playoffs. Go figure. You never know what's going to happen. So my playoff teams are this. Georgia's definitely in. Washington has the second spot. The winner of Florida State, Texas, and Alabama has the third spot, and either Michigan or Ohio State is going to take spot number 4. Again, all these games get played out today, and it's going to be interesting to see how everything shakes out. But regardless if your team gets in or not, you should be glued to the TV because this is a very exciting time of the year. It's one of the reasons why football has taken over as the number one sport in America. And has been that way for years, and it's going to continue to be that way far into the future. So buckle that seatbelt up. Watch and see if Georgia can take apart Alabama. If not, you're probably going to have 2 SEC teams in the playoffs, despite Texas beating Alabama. But we'll see. People are tired of seeing that matchup, and I think it's going to bite them in the end. So just like I say, it's going to be Georgia, Washington, Florida State, Texas, or Alabama, one game, and Michigan, Ohio State to take the 4th spot. So keep that in mind as things unfold. Until then, this has been Sports for Real.